your health, your way, your community. Make the change. Join the movement.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Heal Me. Today we're talking Discovering Yourself, and we've got with us John Kai Wallis. Welcome, John. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Freshly meditated, freshly rejuvenated. Nice cup of water there from the spring. So yeah, I'm good. I'm ready to go.
Good to go. I was having a look through your profile and through the introduction, and it's a pretty cool profile. I'm excited about what we're going to chat about today, because there's a lot in there that you're talking about, and some of this, we'll touch on further, obviously, but you've got a bunch of things in there that says drawing extensive experience from the 5 personality patterns, archetypal integration. John helps clients transcend living beliefs or limiting beliefs, survival patterns, and emotional blockages. And it goes on and on. So there's so much there. Do you want to start off with giving us a little bit of your background, and
Yeah,
and
sure.
then we can jump in from there and get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So background wise, raised in England, came to Australia as an immigrant. My dad wanted to come out here and buy a property and start a farm and live that true Australian life, um, which took us down a porthole of mum didn't want to come, family left back home, and then for us being raised in a religious household as well, so Christianity and some other forms of religion as well, um, framed on my sexuality, who I was, until I started to do the deep work. But before the deep work, I was in corporate for 17 years in the film and television industry. And from there, just seeing what goes on there and selling my soul in various ways, shapes, and forms to get paid and get bonuses and look good in a corporate environment. And then after a rocky relationship, I ended up stumbling across a mentor who showed me a lot of what I know now, and I've furthered that education since. Um, and now I love what I do, helping people specifically with their relationships, but also connecting to their core self that tends to hinder them from having like really healthy, vibrant, fun, playful relationships.
All right. So you came. How long have you been doing this work for?
Good question. Year 2024. I'd say about 7 years, 6 to 7 years doing this work.
And what was the main trigger to jump ship from the corporate world and all of that to this point here?
Yeah, great question. The first answer that pops up to me was a woman. And I got involved with a woman, and she said, "John, do you like what you do?" And I said, "No, I don't." I said, "Well, why are you still working there? You're not in integrity." So, being the injured little boy that I was back then, I quit my job and started following her. She wrote a cookbook that was referenced to 1,500 journal studies about naturally sweetened, dairy-free, plant-based diet. So I was going to help her sell her book. But what happened on that adventure was she became chronically ill. She's already had some pre-existing symptoms, but I took care of her for 3 years as a 24/7 live-in carer. And that was a rocky relationship. But in that journey of traveling with her book, I met this mentor who said, "John, like you can go into politics and you'll need to find somebody else to mentor you, and or you could do what you do now because you are really spiritually gifted in being able to help people through whatever they're struggling with." So that was the key for me. And in that mentorship, I met my first business partner, and we started working just with men, helping them deal with sexual injuries, purpose, all that kind of stuff. But then that business collapsed over COVID, or the pandemic, and then I started my own business, doing what I do now.
And so one of the first things that came up in the profile was talking about the 5 personality patterns. What's
Yeah.
the 5 personality patterns? Should we start
Oh,
there?
I'm so glad you asked. The 5 personality patterns are based in Wilhelm Reich's work on characterology. And I don't know if you're familiar with Wilhelm Reich and his work. Well, he was a protege of Freud, and he discovered orgone energy. And he also discovered that in his psychiatric practice, of seeing clients and patients that people would present with similar symptom pictures that would also be reflected in their body shape. So the 5 personality patterns draws on your body shape as a mirror to your trauma, your childhood trauma or epigenetic trauma. And each of these 5 personality patterns has a survival strategy that helped keep you alive up until this point, and it's mirrored in your bodily structure, in your armoring, in your how you move, how you walk, how you have sex, how you speak. Yeah,
And can you name those 5 for me?
absolutely. Yeah, sure. There's the leaving pattern, there's the merging pattern, there's the enduring pattern, there's the aggressive pattern, and there's the rigid pattern. And then underneath those, there's an advanced subsection, but it gets a bit deep. There's subsets within those as well. But the first 5 are just the easiest one to be palatable and understandable.
So then you go into talking about limiting beliefs. So do you want to explain to us what sort of limiting beliefs you think are holding back most people?
Yeah, great question. Right now, in my client base and what I see, is people don't believe that they can have a better life. So when they've been oppressed and then repressed to believe that they can have prosperity or amazing relationships or liberation or freedom, there can be, am I allowed that? And what kind of bridges or things do I need to cross to get there? So the limiting belief in summary would be, am I allowed to have a great life?
Sorry, I thought I was still on mute. And so explain to me, so let's go deeper onto the limiting beliefs, because this is something that I think is probably linked a lot to trauma and patterns of our upbringing that are putting these sort of ceilings on what we can achieve and what we can do. Now, I was very fortunate in having a big belief in myself very early on. I became an adventurer, ended up doing an adventure company and taking people all around the world. And my first one was scuba diving in Antarctica. So the first big one that I did on my own. So after that, there was a big turning point for me where I had this belief that I could do anything. And that was probably the biggest thing in my life up until that stage that opened my eyes to the excitement of the world. And then I was just like, wherever I focus, I can make that happen. Now, the more I've gone through life, the more I've realized that that's not the case for a lot of people, that they actually hit this wall, this limiting belief in themselves, which I find quite foreign because it's been with me for so long that I've been able to do those things. But what is it that is it the fact that we can train it? Can we do something like that? I push ourselves in different scenarios, like an adventure scenario or whatever, where we then achieve and then we build those beliefs. What is it that we need to do to overcome some of those limiting beliefs? Or is it a pattern that goes so far and so deep through our bloodlines and that sort of thing that some people are armed with that and some people aren't?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And for me to answer it the most articulately would be if I framed it through the 5 personality patterns. So each of the 5 personality patterns has its own preset limiting belief. So, for example, the leaving pattern believes that they don't belong here. So if they want to push their edge, they need to acknowledge that, oh, you actually belong here, and there's people that are around you that want to help you step into that greatness. The merging pattern will believe that they don't know themselves. So they'll always be looking outside of themselves for validation. Like, am I doing it yet? Am I doing it yet, daddy or mummy or whatever it is? Am I doing it yet? The endurer doesn't like taking advice and will actually hunker down the more pressure and advice you give them. The aggressive type and the rigids tend to be the ones that can really move forward in life and create the life that they want. The aggressive tends to trample on people when they're in the shadow. So they're like the Tony Robbins of the world. They're like a lot of the executives and the psychopaths of the world. And then the rigid pattern, they are rules based. So like your David Goggins, that kind of style, who can like function, create a rule for their life and just live by it. So everybody has their own built-in survival strategy that can help get them to where they want to go. It doesn't always mean they'll find fulfillment, but they can get to where they want to go.
So is it often that people are a mix of those?
Yes.
I'm a little bit of that, I'm a little bit of that.
Yeah. So you're born with a kind of even spread of all five. And then depending on your parental dynamic, your family of origin dynamic, two emerge as the most dominant. And then when you start to do the deep work to deprogram and actually turn these into more of the character traits, like more of a personality pattern, more of who you really are at the core, the other three can start to emerge and all five can start to compete only when it's in a survival state or only when you feel unsafe. Once you learn to feel safe in your body and feel safe in the world, they all start to complement each other for you to create the relationships, life, and future that you want.
So you're actually after a mix, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you are. You are. And you have them by default. But yeah, the more work you do, the more the mixes work with each other to keep you sovereign.
So, okay, so first question, how do you work out which one you are?
Yeah, great. So there's an amazing book called The Five Personality Patterns by Stephen Kessler. He's got a test on his website that can show you what personality patterns that you are. I'd recommend anybody to do that. I've got my own tests, but they're more specifically around relationships. But just to grassroots it, this came from Wilhelm Reich, which was advanced by Alexander Lowen, which was advanced again by John Parakos, and then Stephen Kessler's really simplified it. And it's such a beautiful language that he uses. It's so palatable to the majority of the populace. But that book, Five Personality Patterns by Stephen Kessler, great place to start.
Okay. So let's bring it into children then for a second. So how important do you think it is to, I guess, understand some of these things so that you can get the best out of your children and support them in becoming the best versions of themselves without, I guess, our personality types getting involved and restricting them?
Oh, critical, Dave. Absolutely critical. I think it's really important for the parent themselves to individuate as much as they can, so they can start teasing apart, well, who is me from my child? Because the child's going to identify with the parent straight away, especially in those early stages of development where they don't know who they are. I am my mother. I am my father. So the journey of the parent in being able to tease apart the identity of the child and the parent is critical. But you can only do that if you've done elements of work that take you into the individuation process.
Okay, so what does that look like for a child? What does that look like for a parent to go through and to try to work that out?
Yeah, great. So first of all, it requires acknowledging that we might not have it all together. Like for me personally, it was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm from a corporate job, great money. I've got a career path, kind of, but it's not fulfilling. So being able to acknowledge the sensations in the body of something's off, something's off. And the first part is, well, maybe connecting it to spirit or source or whatever it is that you connect into. To go, well, show me. What do I need to see? Take me to someone. No, help me get this mirrored back to me so I can grow and individuate. And the pathway here can involve shadow work, parts integration, family systems, gestalt, voice dialogue. Um, if you want to go into plant medicines, go into plant medicines. But a lot of it involves doing the reflective work, like self-reflection, and then integration and embodiment through taking action, which tends to be a step people miss, is you've got to take the action. Otherwise, learning all the stuff is you just become a walking library. When you take the action and actually do the thing, that's where the embodiment comes from.
And what sort of actions are you talking about? So let's say you have discovered that you have something to work on. What would be a typical thing in which you would then try to put into place so that those words and that knowledge is not wasted?
Yeah, great, great, great. So, for example, like if someone wanted to start an adventure company, right? So they'd look at what's the first step that I need to do? Maybe it's register a business name. Maybe it's actually put an offering out there that I want to do this thing. Maybe it's booking a flight, right? So if you don't, does that answer your question or is it something else?
Yeah, if that's so, first step is just doing whatever it is to get you that first step closer. So effectively, you know, you're going, okay, I want to be here, wherever that may be. What do I need to do to be there? Which I find common sense, and it's interesting. Sometimes common sense is not that common. Is that you look at things logically and you go, okay, well, that makes sense, right? I want to get over here. How do I get there? Well, the first thing I need to do is book the flight, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But a lot of people get caught up and they don't take those steps and they start to deconstruct or start to doubt themselves in those early stages and don't take that first step. And I'll give an example. Someone that I know is wanting to set up a business, and they believe that they need lots of money to start up a business, which you often don't need. You can do it very cheaply. In fact, most of the stuff I've ever started with is with very little money. You know, maybe $500, like Living Free, or some of these other things. So most people can come up with $500, but the belief is that I need much more money. So they go and then chase something with a whole lot more money to get to that position where they can then get to the starting line, when the starting line was 5 years ago.
Correct.
That type of thing. So, it's putting, I guess, obstacles in the way to prevent them from taking those steps. So is that self-doubt? Is that what's creeping in at that stage, or is that not understanding what they're doing? Or
Yeah, it is self-doubt, but what I also see as much deeper is a relationship with death. So the earlier in life you have a relationship with death, the easier it is for you to pivot into situations where you'll just take the risk. Like you're much less risk averse. So you'll be, for example, with your business, like just starting with $500, give it a go. What's the worst that could happen, and what's the best that could happen, right? But I totally understand the illusion of safety that accruing more money can do. I get it. I've been there. But the real step into faith, and faith is a big component here, and trusting yourself is, can I do this little thing and can I see the returns? But if you don't do the little thing to begin with, you don't see the returns, which doesn't build the self-esteem, which doesn't build the self-trust. So the self-doubt just cycles in the mind. And what happens if I fail? What happens if I fail? What happens if I fail? Yeah, but like the beginning of our conversation, what happens if you win? What happens if it creates the next thing for you? What happens if it opens doors for you that you can't get by building up all of this back end resource? Oh, mute. I got to hear that beautiful voice, Dave.
sorry, mate. So when we're sort of hitting those limiting beliefs, and you touched on spiritual, I believe sometimes this is to take us off track on a spiritual sense. You're leaning into something, potentially you're doing what you're meant to be on purpose, but yet something will take you off track. And
Correct.
usually, if you're heading in the right direction and you have struggled with these things before, something will come up, and it'll be surprising to me the things that come up. I can now see these things coming, and I find it amusing because it's almost a tick that I'm doing the right thing. And often it's not necessarily through me now. It's not that self-doubt that's coming through, but it'll be an external attack. It'll be from someone who isn't in control of their spiritual self. And I just go, I see you. I see what's coming, and I know why it's coming. It's because I'm trying to do something more. How much in that side, the spiritual side, do you look at, what's happening?
Hugely. I think it's a huge component, the spiritual side of things. And like, if depending on what model of the world that you subscribe to, whether you're here for a spiritual journey or you're a prison planet or whatever, it's like when you see that everything's trying to guide you back guide you back home to yourself, you can use it as leverage. And people that you can feel that you're most closest to can throw those biggest curveballs at you, right? It's like, I'm doing this thing. Oh, are ya? Last time you tried that, you failed. Now, what would your family think? What would your wife think? What would your kids think? It's like, yeah, but I know I need to do that thing. So listening to spirit and that soul's calling is huge in this, because I find, and I've been here, we can get caught up in the logic, and the structure and the pragmatism of trying to avoid the failure that we actually miss out on all the side missions that actually get us the full fulfillment out of life.
It's funny on a business side, when you talk about business as the example, I no longer do any, and I really haven't ever done too much of this stuff. You know, the SWOT analysis, you're coming up with your business plan, you've got to do this. And the only time I ever did that was to get a bank loan for what I'm doing. But I either had a gut feeling that this is going to work, this is going to make sense, or it doesn't. And I wonder whether these things are put in place because it's almost like these are the first steps that you need to do. If you're going to open up a business or if you're going to do something, you need to write down all of these things. And I think people get caught up in that process and go, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do a SWOT analysis. What if this goes wrong? And you're actually putting all these negative parts in it rather than just being led by spirit or, by that inner purpose. So you start to then doubt because, you're looking at your weaknesses and you're looking at your threats and you're looking at, okay, well, what if these guys come after me, or what if they do this, or my competitors? You're constantly meant to look at your competitors. And it's like, to me, that's actually the wrong way to go about business.
Correct.
Actually just bring what you're doing forward rather than focusing on other people. And this is probably an analogy for life as well in many ways. It's, what's your purpose? What are you meant to be doing, rather than comparing to others and to then try to put yourself in some sort of position that is limiting to where you're meant to truly be.
Totally. And I see that stems from childhood, where your parents tried to coax you into being like them. So you have this reoccurring pattern of, well, I need to be like them. I need to be like them. I need to be like them. In the context of business, like for me, when I started this leg of my business, I had $2,000 in the bank and I just gave up to, I don't know what I'm doing. I need somebody else who's done this to show me the way. And I gave my mentor at the time, was it $1,500? And he showed me how to run my business. And within a month, I turned my entire business around. But he didn't do all the SWOT analysis and other stuff. He was like, John, here's how you do DMs. John, this is how you do the short call. This is how you do the strategy call. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's incredible. John, have you ever put an offering out there? No, I haven't. Well, how are people supposed to buy from you if you don't put out an offering? I'm like, duh. So it didn't matter how much of the inner work that I'd done or how many tools or techniques and modalities that I knew. The actual putting the rubber on the road came from somebody telling me and auditing my business and saying, John, you're messing up here. Like, you got to do it this way. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
So let's go into, you talk about the survival patterns.
Yep.
So what's the survival patterns that most people are running?
Yeah, the one that I see right now is terror, like afraid of death. And terror is a mixture of trapped anger and fear. And in that, it can push you into a state of not moving, like a functional freeze. So a functional freeze is what I see a lot of people going through life, where they habitually wake up, go to work, do the thing, when they think that they're living their life, but they're not. They're living this something else. And this functional freeze is so socially approved that that's what I see the main survival pattern that's going on right now. To frame it through the 5 personality patterns, there's such an even mix of all of them. There's less of the aggressive type than there is out of all of the other ones. But the rigid's also the one that's the most socially approved. They're your bankers, they're your financiers, they're the ones that work in the corporate sector that always dress nice. They're in that positions of authority, lawyers, doctors, all that kind of stuff. They're the most socially approved survival pattern.
So, okay, let's talk into the fear of death then. So I think we're built somewhat with a fear of death. That continues on, and maybe that's part of a safety aspect. But then also how much of that is programming. And I think about, as a child, there's a spider on the ground. And then we say, don't do that, don't pick up that, it could bite you, it could kill you, don't fall off that, and we're sort of learning these protection things, but how much of that is actually programming us to fear a whole lot of things that we don't or shouldn't fear. And it's hard as a parent to not do that. It's hard to not say, hey, you know, you could break your arm if you climb up there, maybe be a bit more careful. So how do we balance those two things? Is that one, we want to, you know, do these things that are pushing the boundaries, which I've loved to do my whole life. And I've always had my mum in particular worry about the sorts of crazy things that I've done. Because obviously there's a fear of death, and they're quite risky things. If you're under the ice in Antarctica or chasing people around in Mexico or doing, you know, crazy things, you're putting yourself in a position that's dangerous. But then that's where a whole lot of growth comes as well. So the same as a child, we need to be able to, I guess, put boundaries around them somewhat to make sure that they, you know, don't go floating off down the river. But you know, also let them feel that part of danger that comes with that. So what's your thoughts on those things, of how to balance those two aspects?
Yeah, great question. And for me, also in my work, I do human design and gene keys. And my son, I'll use my example of my son. So my son is about to turn 2, and he's a sixth line in human design. And the sixth line means they have to learn the hard way up until they're about 50 years old. So learning things the hard way means you've got to walk through that thorn bush. You got to break that arm. You got to break that leg. You've actually got to take the risk and learn from it that way. So how I frame it is in my language. Instead of me saying to my son Luca, watch out for that. Luca, don't do that. Don't, you could hurt yourself. Luca, be focused, be present, pay attention to what you're doing. So that's the inversion of the language to bringing him into a more acute sense of self instead of like fear, which is effectively my fear, because he might internally be like, whatever. But for me, I'm like, yeah, because of my experience and my life, I'm projecting that onto his reality, which can then eventually become his reality. And I don't want that. So in that, I think Jordan Peterson talks about this too. Conscious neglect, conscious neglect. So where, like, I don't know about you, but I was raised in a time when you could just go out at night on your bike and just ride through the streets and do whatever you wanted to do. Like in between waiting for like computer game loading on the Commodore 64, like you just go and do your own thing. But now there's an element of helicopter parenting and or bubble wrapping the kids that doesn't allow them to experience the edges of life, which they don't build the resilience. So in the conscious neglect piece for me, so I'll let him be a bit more free range within reason. And then I know internally that in my parenting style, there's a percentage of a chance that I'm going to mess up my son, or give him trauma. And then because of the work that I've done, I can be with that if he ever comes to me and says, hey, Dad, when you did that thing to me when I was 10 years old or 8 years old, like it really hurt me. And I think it's really impacted my relationships. So I'm like, yeah, thank you, son. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Like, what is it that you need from me in order to feel complete about that? And just sort it. Done. Solved. Because there will be stuff that needs to be learned karmically, and there'll be stuff that's trauma based.
There's an acknowledgement of what that is. I guess that's the biggest thing of what you're saying is with your son in that example, it's an acknowledgement of what they're feeling. And this is what I've noticed actually in my own life. My eldest brother had some trauma as a child, you know, separated, he's my half brother, but he held on to this anger that went on for years. It was like he was 45, 50 and you know, was very aggressive to the world. And he used to always take it out on my mum. And then I learned that exact thing of this acknowledgement. She always used to say, that's not how it happened, you know, and sort of defend it. And I said, Mum, have you ever thought about just accepting it? Just go, look, that's how you saw it. I apologize for my part in it. So we did this thing, and she actually went down. She spoke to my eldest brother and had this conversation and said, look, I'm sorry for that. I acknowledge that you went through this, and we didn't think anything of it. But basically we were looking about 2 years later and we're like, actually, he's started to be really nice to you. And we're like, when did that start? And we went back, we basically tracked it back to this time of acknowledgement, guy that had so much trauma that was sitting there just needed to be acknowledged. Now, he doesn't know this story, but effectively, there was something that was really important in that. And that seems to be a typical parenting thing, is that we I guess, defend our parenting, or we defend our position on that because we don't really, I guess, want to admit fault. And that's possibly generational more so. I think we're more open to those sorts of conversations now than potentially previous generations. And that allows that healing, I guess, is that first part of it, where if they're not acknowledged, if they feel like they're crazy for having these thoughts because no one's ever saying that this actually happened, or at least that's your version of what happened, then they can't actually start the healing process. So I find it, that sort of idea of acknowledgement is the first step of healing. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the acknowledgement and validation piece is critical. Without that, it's a blockage. And if you subscribe to the model that we are all connected at some level, some fundamental level, then when you can acknowledge somebody else's pain from that deep place of empathy and compassion and really wanting to understand the other person, miracles happen, Dave. It can completely reshape the trajectory of a family system if you can just, what I call, falling on the sword. We just fall on the sword. It's like, yeah, I was wrong. I apologize for really hurting you. I'm sorry, right? And that I'm sorry, like a genuine, heartfelt sorry with no but on the end of it, game changer for family systems and relationships.
Hmm. So another aspect that you go into is the emotional blockages. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So in that, you are your emotions and you are not your emotions. So part of the survival patterns is that your emotions and how you react, your body either reacts or represses, impacts how you move forward in life. So emotional blockages can be like, I don't feel good today, so I'm not going to do the thing, right? Like you've got something that's really important to do. I feel sick today. Yeah, that can also be a survival strategy where maybe you didn't want to go to school and then you just always played sick so you wouldn't have to go to school or sit an exam or do a thing, right? It becomes a cycle that plays out throughout your life. So with emotional blockages, it requires you to hear somebody's story over time and ask them, it be in query of what their reality is, and ask them to be with the emotion. The easiest part is just feel the feeling. Like, what's there? What is it actually? Like, what's the sensation that comes up just before this emotion starts? And sometimes it's a little bit of tension in the chest, can be labeled as anxiety. Sometimes your breath, you stop breathing. Like you just, I've held my breath, John. Something's stopping me from saying this, or I feel constriction in my throat. So all of these signs that manifest in the body tend to have a deeper core root of fear, or fear of humiliation or something. So moving through an emotional block requires, depending on what it is, can require an excitation of the body. And this is what we do in core energetics, is that you excite the body and then you discharge the residual armoring or patterning in the body by either lying down or particular positions that you stand in, and in that trembling, in that shaking, you're allowing more vitality to be enlivened in the body because you've done the charging work to access the armoring and then the discharging work to allow it to come all through the body. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, somewhat. Let's go deeper into that. So when you're talking about that, it almost sounds like a spiritual cleansing of such. And as you've sort of touched on, there is a spiritual connection to this. So how much overlay do you think that there is from the sort of scientific approach to this, to the spiritual approach? And, is there aspects in which you acknowledge that in the work that you do, and take sort of charge from a spiritual sense to be able to remove these blockages?
Totally. Totally. So in that context as well, if I was going to draw in some other spiritual practices, like demons can show up, and parasites can show up, things that are non-human can show up in this space as well. Um, and then the spiritual component of filling the person with love or whatever their connection with love is, source, infinite source. Because once you do a lot of the clearing work, you really need to fill the person with like love and compassion and community in particular. So what I've seen in the cycles of where I've come from with this mentorship was that we didn't really do enough filling ourselves with love. So you can get stuck on this train of just always grinding into your trauma and your shadows, all this kind of stuff. But then when you go to actually live your life, there's still a part of you that's stuck in digging in the dirt all the time. So connecting with nature is a huge one for me that I recommend clients to do and people in general. Like, what's nature to you? Touching a rock, like being in water, like the ocean in particular, especially the ocean, trees, really being able to connect to nature as something that is part of spirit.
So it's interesting that you talk about the aspect of filling that gap, I guess, with love or something else, because I've heard on the spiritual side as well, when someone does like sort of a demonic cleansing or something like that, one of the big mistakes is to not fill that up, because then it gets taken up again. There's still a gap there. So what would you suggest? So you say fill it with love, but what's that actually mean? How do you actually fill a gap that you've sort of opened up?
That's a great question. So what I take people through is a meditation to process to fill themselves with a light. Sometimes it's purple, sometimes it's white, sometimes it's golden. But then I also get them to do a task. This is part of the embodiment, taking the action piece, which can be going out for a drive to their favorite location, like going to sleep under a tree, jumping into the water and just feeling a deep gratitude for life and all the journeys and trials and tribulations and the gratitude, whatever they've done in the past to get to this point. Because when it comes to survival patterns, when you stop surviving and you start living your life on the other side of that, it can be a lot of disbelief. Am I allowed to keep this? Am I allowed to have a life like this? So being able to daily ground in that that's your new normal. Like, I'm allowed to have an incredible life. I'm allowed to have great relationships. I'm allowed to feel free. I'm allowed to wake up and feel this good even before my coffee. Then that's what changes the mechanism for the body. You actually rewire your body to believe that you're allowed a certain type of life, which also elevates your consciousness. So the baseline of where you wake up to is much higher on a daily basis.
And so I guess a lot of that comes back to guilt and things like that. If people are starting to feel like they're moving forward, and potentially they're comparing again to other people, and they're saying, okay, well, they're not moving forward. It could be the same thing in relationships when you're trying to take that journey. Someone else isn't quite with you, we saw a lot of that over the last few years, in which people were making or waking up of sorts, and potentially their other half wasn't. So what's your thoughts on then the guilt side of things, how to stop that spiral back down? Because that's what I see, is that people make these steps up and then they spiral back down. So they go back into the same pattern. Even if you feel that gap in between, does that pattern still often come back up? And is it something that you need to deal with, multiple times?
It can, when you become complacent to the new normal. Because once you start to grow, the growth doesn't stop. It just iterates in different ways, right? So in the last couple of years, if you needed to leave your partner and start and then do you start a new relationship? Like, maybe the hardest step was leaving that partner that just wanted to stay where they are or wanted to believe the narrative. Then do you want to have a new relationship? Do you want to move suburbs? So you had to, it's a perpetual motion. But then when you get stuck in the inertia of like, I'm afraid, which doubles back to your initial entry conversation around, well, is it common sense? Like, you got to keep taking the action, because the entropy will just eventually catch up with you. So if you get to that point of comfort, comfort is the worst thing to just stay in. So knowing that there's There's an edge that needs to be pushed in order to keep this momentum going. Otherwise, you're just going to sink back into the old habits that are self-destructive for you and your family.
I actually find from a mental health point of view, if I'm not pushing the boundaries of what I'm capable of, that's actually quite depressing for me.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things of not knowing where you're going or setting that direction or working out what that purpose is. Then that's really where I think other things start to come in, that doubt, all of those other things. So for me, it doesn't last too long. It might be a few days where I'm like, something major's happened. I don't know where I'm going to go. And then my brain's constantly thinking, okay, how am I going to deal with this situation? Then I come up with a plan and then I go for it. And then I feel okay again. But those
Yeah.
few between that really uncomfortable stage is probably a really important stage to feel, because that in uncomfortable times you have to make decisions and move, right? So there's something that's occurring that's making you move. So it's whether you choose to then, I guess, be a victim and wallow in whatever has occurred, or choose to take the positives from that and move forward.
Mm. Yeah, totally. And doubling back to the 5 personality patterns, like I can look at you and I can tell two of the main ones that appear right now, and that's why you're so good at doing that, because you've got the survival patterns that'll. I'm not going to stay here. And if I stay here, this is the end. So I'm going to create a plan to move forward, and it's really potent. It's a really potent leadership quality to have. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
Mm. So let's talk about a typical session. So if someone comes to see you,
Mhm.
what's that look like? How do they do it? And what would be the starting point of doing it?
Yeah, great question. So, how it normally starts is I do a pre-qualification just to make sure that they're ready. Because some people hear about my work. Most of the time, they're not ready for my work because it requires like changing your life. So much so you might need to leave relationships or end a job or whatever it is. You can't stay in denial in my work. So that's why I also say see everybody else before you come and see me. Like that's my thing. So a typical session would be either in person or online. I do fly to clients depending on what they need, and we'll do uh, a Gestalt style past self, present self, and future self, and that exposes like what's going on in your life, the past part of you that's keeping you safe, the present sense of you that can't seem to make sense of it all, and the future self that's looking back at the other two types, going, "What are you guys doing? Like, why we can create this version of me right now that's really happy and fulfilled." Um, what it'll also involve, the deeper side of my work, is lower self work, and lower self work is the primal part of the human condition, the monster, where we do specific exercises to access rage, wrath, excuse me, vengeance, can be towards a caregiver, can be towards an ex, can be towards God or the government or something else, where I help you access an anger that can sometimes lash out in relationships or unexpectedly that causes a lot of destruction. So when you access the lower self and can embody it, you can move through life with a level of presence that you will struggle to get if you don't access that primal part of us. What we've evolved from, basically, the nail biting, tearing flesh from bone primal being that's got us to here today. If you don't acknowledge it, then it just comes out in some other leaky or destructive way.
So then they'll turn up, they'll do some sort of pre-qualification aspect, come in, and then you look at past, present, future. That's, is that similar to sort of Jordan Peterson's past authoring, future authoring, that sort of stuff, or?
No, no, it's more embodied. So you're not, because writing keeps you in your head. So because I'm physically with you or I'm working with you on Zoom, like you carrying your laptop around or phone around the house, or where you going sitting in different positions, geographically moving you does something to the morphogenetic field that you're in. So by sitting, when I ask someone, where would you be in the house when you're the most scared? and then I'll be sitting here in this chair, and I'd actually be sitting on the ground. I'd have my head in my hands. Great, go there now. Let's go talk to that version of you. That's part of it. In all of this, I didn't mention that I would give a five personality pattern analysis on the ones that are holding you back in your life. So I'd tell you, these are the ones that are holding you back in your life. Go and read the book. When you've read the book, come to me, and then you can actually go into the deeper work required to turn these survival patterns into something that's not holding you back, but actually propelling you forward.
Okay. So then they come to you, go read the book, go through that process, and then you start to break down some of these things. So you're talking to different elements of yourself that need work. Is that a fair way of?
It is. Yeah, totally. Like the inner child, inner teenager, the inner critic. Different. It's similar to internal family systems, but it's done in a more embodied way because I move you around and I get you to be in the feeling. It's like a family constellation, but just with one person.
So how do you identify those things that need work?
Yeah, great question. It starts with what the other person has, the struggles of the pattern that the person's had in their life. So, for example, a lot of people come to me with relationship issues. So they keep on cycling between partners that are narcissistic, or they're attracted to a partner but not emotionally connected to a partner, or they're emotionally connected to a partner but there's no sparks there, there's no chemistry. They keep on cycling between partners that don't support them, or something. There's something that happens. So it's in the patterns. That's how I identify the key ones that need to be worked on. And then once those are shifted, there can be other patterns that reveal themselves. But it always starts with patterns.
Okay. So that's basically just a self-assessment of such where you're sort of digging deeper. Okay, what are you finding? Where are you finding your blockages? Trying to break that down.
Yeah. And the first part is, well, what do you want? Like, what do you want to create? Like, I want to have a great life, I want to have great relationships. Great, cool. What's in your way? Where do you keep getting to and then falling back? Or sometimes it can be an income ceiling. Like they can't hit above like $50,000 a month or $10,000 a month. I can't move beyond this. Like, great, cool. Let's have a look. What's there for you? It's the soul knows it's got a destination to go to, and it just can't get there. And that's where I look at, well, what's in the way here?
So let's use an extreme example then. Let's use domestic violence. So
Mm-hmm.
we know often there's a pattern of domestic violence where a woman will continue to go back to the abuser. How would you deal with that situation? Because that's a major psychological aspect which doesn't have much logical sense. You're being abused, you're being beaten up, but the next day you're turning up to the same person's house and you're putting yourself in that same situation. How would you break down what would be the elements in why someone would choose to do that?
Yeah, great question. And the domestic violence clients that I've worked with, first of all, it starts with the compassion piece, because it's a survival pattern. They don't really know what's going on inside of them. It's like an unconscious pattern that plays out. The next piece, it's a self-love and self-worth piece. And it starts with looking at anchoring to where they really value themselves. Because domestic violence can be a really sensitive situation, especially depending on the style of domestic violence, and it tends to escalate. So if it's usually a woman, statistically, so I take them through, well, who's at risk here? Do you value yourself enough to change this circumstance? And it's also not getting angry at them if they do go back. So it's like, oh, we've made this progress. You're out, you're free. And then a year later, oh, he did some work on himself, and now we're back together again. But he's still being abusive. It's like, yeah, it's okay. I understand the cycle. Like, you actually deeply love this person, right? Of course, you feel like you're bonded at some level. So it just requires and it tends to be an endurer injury from the five personality pattern. The endurer tends to always go back to their original site of abuse. This requires compassion and time and compassion. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. I mean, it's a difficult situation to try to unpack, but effectively there's something that obviously they're craving or trying to fulfill or feel within themselves that's pushing them to go back.
Yeah, negative attention.
And so what is it, I guess, when we start to break down these things, what we're looking at is why are we attracting these things? And you're talking about the patterns, and I wanted to use domestic violence as an extreme version of that, but often there's this lesson and they're not learning from this lesson. So they go back to either the same partner or another abusive partner. And I've seen it with a lot of women where their idea is that they need to fix a man, so they actually go into that relationship, try to fix them, because there's something, I guess, that they like to do in fixing, or, I can see the potential in them. I want to make them better. And so these are sort of common things, and it happens obviously in other directions as well, not just women to men, but it's one of these things that it starts off on a negative aspect of thinking that you've got to do that. And so I guess what is it that's then in that individual? Let's say the fixing idea. Yep. I always want to fix them. I want to make them better. And it's the bad boy thing, right? As well. They're attracted to the bad boy. Why? Because they want to control the bad boy and make him good or whatever it is. So why are they attracted to assholes?
Yeah, great question.
These types of things, but there's something in them that's choosing that, even though they, on the outside, it's a negative behavior.
Totally. So the pattern that I can hear that you're describing there is called the compensated merging pattern. It's a subset of the merging pattern where they don't have a real core identity, and their identity comes from fixing somebody else. And the bad boy piece is they're identified with the praise or the feeling that they get from being around a bad boy. Like, oh, the bad boy chose me, which can come from their father, relationship with their father, or earlier childhood sexual experiences. Tends to be the opposite sex parent, where either the father was an inherent bad boy or was a weakling, and she craved this more potent masculine model, or the father was a weakling and she wants to keep on saving him from a narcissistic mother or whatever. That tends to be the dynamic that plays out. But to break it requires acknowledging that there's some grief and hurt there. There's some grief and hurt there that needs to be felt.
Okay, so and then let's look at some examples the other way. So, guys and their mothers. So talking about opposite sex, that type of thing. So, the mums, obviously the nurturers. Sometimes you'll have mums that haven't connected with their kids, is a common one. So they're constantly striving to have that connection, or they're very disconnected because they haven't felt that love. So what's some other examples that you see for the opposite, for guys and mums?
Yeah, great. Yeah, great question. Yeah, so for me, like growing up with a bit of a devouring mother, and becoming what's known as a passive feminine man, it's a subset of the rigid. And the passive feminine man can be really soft and well-spoken, but then he can have explosive rage when he feels like he's about to be humiliated, usually by a partner. Usually it can really be triggered by the opposite sex. So the passive feminine man shows up a lot in spiritual communities. He's the spiritual hugger. He's the one that tends to not be able to commit or really exert his potency or create life for himself, because he's at the core, he's impotent, because his mother's kind of stolen or nurtured his sexuality away through just smothering or bonding. John Bradshaw spoke to inappropriate cross-generational bonding. Where secrets are told to the son that should really be explained to the father if there's a father on the scene. So the mother kind of creates this surrogate husband in her son, which shows up in all kinds of messed up relationship dynamics.
So then how important is that dynamic of mum and dad?
Oh, critical, but they need to be polarized in a way that mother needs to own who she is, and father needs to own who he is. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into like trad wife and trad husband type dynamics, but really know what your roles are within the family of origin dynamic and really own them. That's the parts of you that are showing up to create like this divine union or, excuse me, life partnership with children. And that really comes to with communication, because when, for example, two single people get together who are generating an income, then they come together to have children, then one, usually the woman's going to have the child, right? So her earning capacity decreases because she's now pregnant, she's carrying a child, so they can bring up parts in the husband or the father, like, well, now I need to support, now I need to I need to work almost 1.5 times to 2 times as hard to generate the income or whatever it is, can bring up resentment, all this kind of stuff. So it's really important to know that on the cycle of childbirth, that the roles will change. And being in community in particular, I moved to Wollongong because Cassie's, my wife's parents are here, and they're great with kids. My parents, not so great with kids. So I knew that to raise my son around his grandparents is really healthy. So I moved to Wollongong. So we've got the support structure in place to nurture my son, because I knew that Cassie and I on our own wouldn't have the bandwidth to take him from that infant to maturity.
So then, with what's happening in the world, men becoming less like men and women becoming less like women and this sort of stuff. So then we've got this mix that's going on. And potentially you've also got that mix in single parent families, you know, in the fact that, you know, if the dad's left, the mum becomes potentially more masculine or takes more of that masculine role because, you know, it's required. They've got to do everything themselves and vice versa. But then for women to be truly feel like women, and this is a big thing for, I think, a lot of women demonize each other and attack each other, especially, you know, on the corporate side of things. There's this masculine energy for you to achieve in a corporate world. So you really push into that. So you see a lot of the women who have achieved in a corporate world are very masculine in the way that they go about things. And then you've got this aspect where we don't celebrate the mother to be a stay-at-home mum. And so they're now looking at, well, I've got to have a job, plus I've got to have the kids. So I've got to drop the kids off at childcare and I've got to do this. And I've, you know, so they're trying to, I guess, take on that more masculine role that would traditionally be, you know, the provider type role as well. And that's also obviously to do with financial pressures. But then the male is being told to not embrace any of the masculine, and that we've got to be, you know, more caring, more nurturing, more all of these feminine sort of traits to be a good man. And you can see there's a whole lot of confusion going on in the generations now. So from your experience, how much of that is occurring in the people that you see, where you're like, you need to embrace the fact that you're a man. You need to embrace the fact that you're a woman. You need to acknowledge this and be proud of who you are and the differences of what you are. Because that's, I think, a really difficult thing to overcome at the moment is, you know, because the whole of society is pushing in this direction. And it's actually, you know, I think there's a lot of programming that's occurring that is suggesting that a man to be a man, you know, to be proud of that, you shouldn't, especially as a white man, you shouldn't be proud of those things, because, you know, that's not, you're so privileged, you know, all of these things. So how much are you seeing of that stuff that's going on that's really difficult to overcome because the whole of society, news cycles, all of that, that's actually pushing these different agendas, are affecting their ability to be who they really should be?
Yeah, great question. Like, you may have heard the saying, many are called and few are chosen, or vice words to that effect. Like, there's some people that will just not wake up. They'll just not. There'll be the furniture that perpetuates this model, this programming, and there's some people that will want to break out and change. And in that breaking out requires embracing their own individuality. Where in the context of a woman, can she connect to her body? So a woman that hasn't been raised by a whole family system will have armoring in her cervix, in her pelvis, and her heart. So in order for her to recognize and receive genuine love, to open up, to embrace her biology, requires a different level of deep work. And then for a man who's been told, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to be masculine, you're not allowed to exert your dominance or be aggressive, or God forbid you ever use your anger constructively, then he needs to own that there's people in his life that have been lying to him, that his anger is actually an important mechanism in being able to terraform the world, create the world in his image. So what can happen here is someone will get to a point of sadness and frustration, but then wallow in the frustration and not use the anger as a catalyst to push through the blockage in order to become like courageous and proud of what they've created, right? Proud that you've actually slaved your way to a point, or you've broken these generational bonds, or created a business, or be able to put your flag down and be like, hey, I did this. Like, I created a family, I created a business, like whatever it is. So in that, there can be elements of looking outside of yourself for validation. But when you start turning that locus of control back to you, and you own that, no, I did this, and I did this with the help of spirit or soul, then it transforms your need to rely on external validation just to be yourself. You're individuated. You know you can create things. You know you can destroy things, and that's where I think real power comes from.
So then connection. So one of the big aspects is not feeling connected. And I guess that's also not knowing yourself as to who you are and what your purpose is and those things. How would you help people find connection?
Great question. Depending on the trauma patterns that are playing out, body work, somatic body work, deep tissue body work, craniosacral body work, getting into the body. So there are a number of shamanic practitioners around Australia. There's a great one in Bondi, in Sydney, that does connecting you back into your body. So when you're born into and who speaks to this? Michael Tazarian speaks to this, the schizogenic society, where when children are born through like C-section, or the mothers are traumatized during the birth process, you end up birthing a child who is predisposed to programming by the outside. And in that, they lose connection to their body, they lose connection to spirit, they lose connection to source. So to do that, to help reconnect to that, is just all through body work. Like you need to work your jaw, your neck. There's a great practitioner online called Devaraj Sandberg. He specializes in bioenergetics, which is an older form of core energetics. And he's great body work practices, free online. He's also got a book on Kindle as well, that show you specific Reiki and breath work or body movements to help you bring you back into your body. But sometimes you do need somebody else's loving touch to be able to hold you, be with you, to help co-regulate you, that maybe a mother or father or grandparent or caregiver couldn't.
All right. So my last major question for you. So there's a lot of people out there who give this knowledge out, who put themselves in a position like yourself. How much of this is an ongoing struggle for you, or how much do you think that you've got it all worked out?
Oh, great question. Like for me, my relationships, I feel the relationship aspect, if I was looking at the wheel of life, my relationships are pretty good. My business, though, that's my grindstone right now, is learning how to master my business. The relationship space is difficult, in my mind, that people don't really want relationships anymore. They're kind of like, oh, I'm done with relationships. They're just too hard. I'd rather be single. I'd rather be this. So bringing people over the line, that you can actually have incredible relationships, nothing like your parents, right? That tends to be my grindstone right now. So in the wheel of life, my health is great. My finances are okay. My lifestyle's great. Just got back from holidays from far north Queensland. I work from home and I have an office. But in business right now, it's my grindstone for the next, I'd say, well, what 2024 for the next 6 years. I'd say it's my business is my grindstone.
Yeah. So do you feel like that when you're giving advice, you're coming from a point that you've discovered most of this stuff yourself, or do you feel like it's something that you have to work on to be able to maintain where you're at?
Uh, no, I think for the most part, I've got the embodiment, I've got the knowledge, and for me, I don't have all the knowledge, which is why I reference other people. I reference other books. I don't. For me, reinventing the wheel isn't efficient. I'd rather direct people to other resources so they can have a look at all of that stuff, make up their own mind, and I can help them put it all together. That tends to be my special, is just putting it all together. All the plant medicine journeys, all the other inner work that you've done, help you embody it and bring it all together.
What do you think the role of plant medicines are in the reconnection or discovery or learning self?
Yeah, great question. I think specific plant medicines work for specific people. I also think the environment matters as well, like who you're doing it with. Are you doing it on the home soil of where the plant medicine comes from? But I think it's critical to really breaking emotional blocks, logic and emotional blocks. I think plant medicine can be an absolute game changer. Is it ethnogenesis? It's a game changer, especially right now. I think it really depends on how deep you want to go. You'll still come up with the same blocks if you don't take action. So you can use the medicine to remove whatever it is you want to move, but if you don't take the action, it's another thing that you've done. But I think it's huge. I think plant medicine and some synthetics, ketamine, LSD, MDMA, just to some extent, depending on the therapy that you're doing. But it's all got in the toolkit of individuation. It's all got a place, and it really depends on, well, where do you want to go with this individuation, becoming who you really are process.
All right. So if we're to finish up soon, so I'm going to give you a chance to sell yourself, which is part of the business blockages that you probably. But before we do that, is there anything else that you would like to discuss that we haven't touched on today?
um, yeah, I guess the seriousness of the inner work. Like inner work can become really serious. I actually did an episode with Here for the Truth guys, Joel and Erasmus, just talking about how serious the inner work can get, and you forget how to be joyful and have fun in life. So you can be super serious. So just make life fun again. Make life fun again. Connect to the innocent part of you that doesn't take life so seriously, and it changes your perspective on how you move through the inner work.
There's a question in the side from Linda. Does John have a typical client, e.g., corporate types, housewife, husband types, people starting businesses, etc.?
All of those. I have corporate types that are wanting to get out of corporate. I have housewives and husband types. I have people starting. I have the whole gamut. So for me, trying to narrow business grindstone, narrowing my niche has been really complicated. It's more people that are people that are here to do the deep work in whatever psychosocial kind of demographic that they're in. They're here for a deep calling, then that they usually come across my path.
All right. And last chance. So sell yourself. So where do we find you? What's the next steps if someone wants to follow you?
Yeah. Well, normally I'll just say, look, don't come to me. Go and do everything else before coming to me. But when you are ready to come to me, go and find me on Facebook. Just look up John Kai Wallis. I've got links in my profile. You can do personality tests. I've got other podcast episodes. So learn to get to know me. Like, see if I'm actually someone that's a right fit for you, because I'm choosing you as much as you're choosing me. So if you're not ready, then I'll say, hey, we're not ready. Maybe come back in a year's time. But if you are ready, then be ready to invest.
All right. Good stuff. So Facebook, John Kai Wallis, and go from there.
Go from there.
Thanks, John. Appreciate your time.
My
And
pleasure.
yeah, we wish you all the best and hopefully catch up again sometime.
I love that. You got great questions, Dave. Great questions.
Thanks, John. Cheers. Have a good day.